going to continue here with the last panel before lunch break, and it's an exciting panel, so it's definitely worth it to stay around. The question that this panel will discuss is, beyond Bitcoin, how to invest in crypto assets. So everyone who's always asked that question, who's maybe a little new to the space, how to invest in crypto assets, we have three incredible experts and an expert moderator joining. First on stage, I'd like to welcome Marc Bettinger, a banking veteran with a background at Credit Suisse and at Julius Baer. But on the other side, he's also known as Altcoin Dad. So please, a warm welcome for Marc Bettinger. Today you're here as a director of the blockchain startup Forctis, however, is that right? That's right. Excellent. Next, I'd like to welcome on stage John Pfeffer. He's an entrepreneur and investor and the author of An Institutional Investor's Take on Crypto Assets. John, welcome. And our third panelist is Ivo Sauter, Managing Director and Head of Operations and Trading at Falcon Private Bank. Some of you might have heard of Falcon Private Bank. They were the first Swiss private bank to add Ether, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash to its asset management services. And finally, I'll give up my moderation job to Richard Titus. Richard's a venture capitalist. He's a technology executive. He's founded Razorfish, Schematic, so he's a serial entrepreneur as well. He's ran digital for BBC and Daily Mail, and done a dozen other things at least. He's also a Wired 100 Britain's top digital power brokers, so it promises to be an incredible discussion. Enjoy and have fun, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Is this on? Hello. So we'll use this, I think. I don't think my mic's on. Can they hear? Oh, there we go. So sorry for keeping you from your lunch, but we promised to make this interesting. I think actually what I thought we'd do is begin with a little history lesson, sort of how did you get your first cryptocurrency? And I'll go first, actually. Brock Pierce actually gave me 10 Bitcoin, which were worth 30 cents a piece at a time. I sold 2 of them for a pizza a year later. I was actually that guy. So how did you get your first cryptocurrency?
I started with crypto. I read a lot about Bitcoin. First, after WikiLeaks was dropped out from the banking system, Bitcoin was at $7. But I wasn't smart enough to install the wallet and thought after half an hour, oh no, this is too bad. So WikiLeaks needs to survive without my money. But 2 years later, 2013, I bought in fall where Bitcoin was around 250 and immediately switched then to altcoins, what was my specialty.
Right, fantastic. What about you? How did you get your first cryptocurrency?
For me, it was also, I bought it at Mt. Gox back then. Lost all of it. Wasn't that much worth yet. Lost a bit of interest as well. I mean, I lost it, I forgot about it, Mt. Gox. We all know what happened there. Just tried it as a bit play, and then only started looking at it a bit more professionally in 2016.
So I was having coffee with my friend Vincent Casares, who founded Zappo in Chile, and he explained to me in 15 minutes what it was, and I basically said, okay, I got it. Money's a ledger for debts. This is a better ledger, Bitcoin. And it's an asymmetric option that I look for in our portfolio. And so after I got out, I left the coffee and called the office, and we allocated a percentage of our assets that day.
Fantastic. So I'm an entrepreneur, and the fact that I've ended up on the capital side, I'm always troubled by it. I feel like I've gone to the dark side. But what's interesting to me is that smart contracts and really Ethereum were this moment for me that I realized that everything about the financial markets and being a founder and raising money was about to change. And so I'm curious, sort of, as you think about the fundraising markets and altcoins as a vehicle for fundraising, what is the thing you've been most excited about and most disappointed about in the last year, and the last sort of, since you got involved in the last year? Go ahead, and you can answer either way.
Well, most excited about, I mean, it's obviously great that new things are being tried and changing. I'm actually, my biggest worry about the markets is what I think is sort of the lack of sophistication in looking at the different values and the correlation of movements in price across things that aren't substitutes for one another. And so I think that the biggest risk we face is that as rationality sets in and most things turn out to be valueless, that the good will get thrown out the bad will get, the good will get thrown out with the bad. Right. That's my biggest concern.
And the thing you're most excited about?
Well, I do think it's interesting that I think in time this will open up new mechanisms for funding. I have to say, I think that it's sort of a misapprehension to assign financial value to utility protocols. And so more interested in, for example, other categories that Alex Tapscott mentioned, like as the next thing, like tokenized securities and collectibles, which hasn't yet really sort of started in earnest. That'll be a future thing.
Everyone talks about money, but I think the tokenization of all the other asset classes is equally interesting. And then you get into things like data and data privacy, and also your ability to own and possess and give and receive data. What about you? What's sort of the thing you're most excited about and most disappointed about?
For us, the most exciting part is that we as a bank could move into that space, because we believe as a bank, this will open the market to a much wider audience. Right. Before, it was more people with a very strong tech affinity were in this field, and it was a big cap for them. For everybody else, it was a big black box. I think as a regulated institute, you can be much wider accepted. I think that's exciting. It's exciting that regulators approve that regulators are allowing us to be in this field and to participate in that, despite all the bad news we hear and we see. The most disappointing thing for me personally is that we are still one of the only banks, that there are so few, that they can't see the opportunity, that they can't see what's coming on, because I truly believe this is going to be a market change. As other speakers said today, I mean, tokenization of things, tokenization of anything, of equities, of bonds, of any financial contract will take part. Right. And if banks don't take part in it, others will. And I think on the payment side, banks have lost the fight already to Apple, to whoever. On this side, we still can win the fight, but we have to be ready to do it.
If it makes you feel better, when I founded a company that eventually became Razorfish, Tag Media, we got our first client from NASA. It was $1 million contract. They sent us a $100,000 check, a $100,000 government check. We walked into 5 banks before we found one that would open a business account for us without a business plan. So this is not a new problem. You know, innovation and banking don't always go along, but you're right. Each innovative bank, like Charles Schwab, went from the number 5 phone brokerage to the number 1 online brokerage by simply embracing technology. So I think that's an absolutely great point.
And we are at the tipping toe. I mean, it's not like it's a nice to have for banks, in my opinion. It's a must have. Yeah. And the quicker they move in, the better it is, not only for the banks, but I think for the whole community.
And what about you? What are you excited about and what are you disappointed in?
To be honest, what Ivo brought up was very exciting, because Falcon was hiding it very good. So it was a big surprise for the whole community.
I know. When I saw the press release, I was like, really?
And we have been all surprised and all excited, because it was really a breakthrough. Because, I was a banker for 20 years, and I always tried to convince first Credit Suisse, then Bank Julius Baer about blockchain. Yeah. And I always get nice talks, but they say, look, we are not interested at this. In my last week at Julius Baer, they have been interested, funny enough. But yeah,
we have an innovation lab.
Too late. Last year I was very excited on a technical thing about projects behind blockchain, like Byteball or Iota. These are new protocols that don't use blockchain, they use DAC. So direct acyclic graph. So for me, it was always a race of technology. I always liked the tech, Despite I was a banker, I always liked the tech. And I like that we see now projects, they are somehow doing something different than blockchain and could work probably as well. Most disappointing last year, a lot of ICOs get flooded with money and they didn't deserve it. The quality was poor and they received 20, 30, 40, 50 million.
Right.
And you know that this project will most likely fail this year or next year, and they will harm a lot of investors, and this could harm the whole ecosystem. I was thinking about the dot-com bubble a bit, where we have had a lot of tech companies, and they are 90% failed. And I was thinking about a lot of newcomers of 2017 went on this ICO train, and probably some of them will get burned, and this is not healthy for the ecosystem.
Well, this is an interesting thing, right? So as a veteran of several revolutions now, I think I'm on my 5th revolution, I actually saw the Amazon deck. It's a really funny story how I saw it. It was terrible. It was a terrible deck. You would never have invested in it. But that turned out to be one of the biggest bets ever, and it's because of execution and longevity and having enough capital to sort of get in. So maybe some of these companies you're funding are raising enough money that they actually will have the capital to build a business model. I'm curious though, so in America, there's this big kerfluffle about security tokens and the securitization of assets versus utility tokens. And it seems to be in many people's minds an all or nothing game. I personally believe that we're going to see sort of a bicameral existence. But I'm curious because you're all in Europe, what you think about this and what your perception is on this. You want to start here?
Well, look, I suspect that most, if not all, utility tokens will be deemed securities by the SEC, and that'll create all kinds of issues for those issuers and the people who've been creating exchanges for those. On the other side of it, I'm sure that there will be, people will create exchanges, and it's already happening, to create regulated broker-dealers and even exchanges, perhaps in time, for regulated tokenized securities. And with some lag, that'll happen, and that'll facilitate these markets, and we'll come through the other side, and some of this will be cleaned. Well, a lot of this will be cleaned up, and there'll be a regulated environment for these things. Now, one of the things that it will do is that it'll make it more of a marginal innovation, a less disruptive innovation.
You mean that no 100% liquidity the day after issuance?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to, for example, Reg D, you get limited accredited investors. You're going to have to create, gates. You're going to have to comply with U.S. state blue sky rules if you're not traded on a stock exchange. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of things that are going to mean that it's less revolutionary than some people in the space might think. On the flip side, those regulations exist and have rationale. So I think ultimately it's probably healthy, but I think some people in the space are sort of misapprehending what that means for the future.
I got yelled at by all my crypto chaotic friends when I said, look, I welcome thoughtful regulation, because like the fraud level last year, sort of at the end of the year, got a little high. The flip side is that security tokens provide actually opportunities to securitize totally new things. So we're doing a project called 22X, which is the syndication of 30 companies' equity out of the last 500 startups cohort. That's a phenomenal innovation in venture capital that you couldn't do without tokenization. So for you on the banking side, I'm curious. So security tokens, you probably feel more comfortable with this.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality, in my opinion, is a lot of tokens call them a utility token, but in reality, they are security tokens. And that's a dangerous path. Lucky enough, I think in Switzerland, the regulator has given a guidance. So FINMA has issued end of February a guidance paper defining exactly what is a payment token, what is a utility token, what is a security token, and also acknowledge that they're hybrid tokens. So I think this will give, again, a bit of a comfort to the whole system, and will allow other regulated entities to be a part of it. Because, I mean, in reality, for a lot of ICOs, the difficulty is not raising the ICOs, funny enough. I mean, at the moment, I think the money just comes in, but afterwards you have your token, you have your Bitcoin, you have your Ethereum, but for most things you still need to transact in the real world, in your Swiss francs or in your euros or in your US dollars, and that becomes a bit more problematic. Your employees, you probably still can pay in such tokens, but then the landlord and the gas line, the phone line, whatever, it gets a bit more difficult. And I think that's going to be something which will be solved with slightly more regulation. I think it needs more regulation. I think it's healthy to have a bit of more regulation. And the faster this comes in, the more it will be steerable and not go into something where a big fraud event or something will generate an over-regulation. Because that's always a danger in such a situation where regulation is in existence or very low. But I hope this gap will be filled, and FINMA has done the first step. And I think, again, that's very good for Switzerland and the crypto valley.
And so I know I waited for altcoin data at the end because this has got to be sort of one of those things where you had this amazing party going, there's amazing stuff happening, and then the US shows up and kind of muddles the waters a lot. So how do you feel about this?
Yeah, like I said, it's somehow unbelievable what was going on within at least since 2013, but most forget the big bear market for altcoins. It was horrible.
I didn't forget. I had a lot of money in right then.
And interesting enough, alts have been in a bear market for 23 months. Bitcoin was recovering, but alts still dropping.
Yeah.
So that was quite bad. But I think these are good points that we have regulation now, especially in Switzerland. The FINMA have done quite a good job. At the moment, I see most of the ICOs try to avoid the security label, and all are happy when they receive the non-action letter from FINMA, because this is somehow, oh yes, we have achieved it. We fulfilled the FINMA rules. For me, this FINMA regulation is just the beginning. I think we will see more and more details about it, because if you look at the FINMA concept, it was good for a start, but there's still a lot of things that you don't know, where you're struggling to see, it could be both, probably. So you are happy when you received a non-action letter, but it should be very clear from the very beginning what you receive. And I would say the path is in the way of utility tokens, and probably the securities, the model will be still the most known way, will be an IPO instead of an ICO for a security thing.
I mean, I think the difference is the delineations between the various capital raising systems are breaking down, which in some ways I think is fantastic. It's the democratization of capital access to businesses and business to capital. I'm curious though, from your standpoint, so when you're investing now, I feel like me, it used to be a deal a day roughly, or 30 deals a month, and now I think I got pitched 30 deals yesterday. How are you finding the market?
So I generally avoid that. And I mean, so we started with Bitcoin, and then in early 17 added a few others, and then basically concluded in July of last year that the only thing that made sense still at current values was Bitcoin, and got out of everything but Bitcoin, and don't intend to do anything else for the near future.
Interesting. Even though it's a 1,300% average return, if you just you bet the portfolio of ICOs last year.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on what date we're talking about.
Yeah.
Since July.
This morning, maybe 1,000% return.
Yeah, since July, we've outperformed with Bitcoin most things, and I think, by the way, these things are going to suddenly be non-tradable. They're going to be, not only some will be, a few will be subject to indictments, and others will be attacked by the swarm of class action lawyers, and so,
Yeah, he who we know shall not say his name. What about you? You're a bank, so you're probably not investing directly.
Exactly.
But
we do direct investments in coins for our clients. At the moment, we have 4: Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and Ethereum, and we are widening that spectrum. We want to go up to the top 10, top 20 in the next couple of months, very, very clearly, very fast forward. For me personally, it's a bit of a disadvantage working in a regulated institute. Compliance comes in, holding periods, approval lines. So it's more of a long-term investment than a trading opportunity like you can take for. But it's very interesting and it's very exciting how our clients have taken this up and how active our clients are.
Right.
From my side, I must say, I always have liked protocols from the very beginning.
Right.
It started with Mastercoin 2013, what was still a little bit a big Bitcoin layer counterparty then. The first real new protocol was not Ethereum, it was NXT.
It was NXT.
End of 2013, and this was somehow my path going through new protocols. And I've learned a lot because of this, because technically protocols are always the most advanced things because they need to deliver everything. Like Ethereum is a network, it's more than something else. So I still like protocols, they are always few. Last year Tezos was very famous in both ways. So they raised a lot, but then there's ongoing discussions. And if I invest money for myself, I focus on protocols, established one and newer ones, like I brought up. I like also new tech, like Byteball, Iota. We will have with Radix a completely new consens mechanism. They're working on this coin since 5 years. It will be in 1 year. And to be honest, also I like good utility tokens if they really offer value. Like Civic, for example, Vinny was there. I like the concept, so I invested in the Civic ICO. But I'm very picky with ICOs, so probably a handful every year. And last year this cost me a lot of performance because most of the ICO went through. But I tried to be, I was a risk manager in the bank, so I calm down, and if I'm not convinced from something, I just stay away.
Right. So it's interesting. I think a lot about this question, which is where are we on the hype cycle in terms of blockchain and Bitcoin? And as investors, it's really important to know. And I've come across this, I've sort of come upon this opinion, which is that I think Marc Andreessen, if we're using the internet as a metaphor for blockchain, which I think is a pretty good metaphor because the internet, what, 6% of GDP, you know, transactions, communications, maybe a little publishing. Blockchain is probably 50, 60% of GDP if you replace all transactions. So this is gonna have an outsized impact. I think we're really at the point where Marc Andreessen has barely left University of Illinois. Netscape doesn't exist yet. You know, there's no Hulu, there's not even HTML5 yet. And so really, we all can get excited as we see the promise of this, but we actually have a bunch of work to do to build an ecosystem. So our focus is on building ecosystem. What is your prediction, just to sort of round us out today, what is your prediction about the next 5 years? Like, what is the thing you really want to see happen? You know, for me, I say, you know, there's probably 400 crypto whales in the world who are the big sort of money behind crypto. I want to make that 400,000. And so that's my mission, is to find new investors, new investor groups, and bring them into this community, because that's how we grow and build our industry. What's yours?
Well, a lot of things I think will happen. One is, I do think assuming, by the way, it's not just a complete zero.
Assuming it doesn't go to zero.
It doesn't go to zero, right, which is a possibility and maybe even a probability. But you know, we're talking about a more bullish case. I think, first of all, broadening institutional investing and non-crypto specific institutional investing in Bitcoin in particular. I think some normalization and realization that utility protocols are somebody's working capital and need to be valued in a very different way. But the emergence of what really is really nascent, I mean, almost hard to find opportunities to invest today, true tokenized securities where you have a claim on a cash flow, and interesting things going on with collectibles, which will probably be a big market in time. In 5 years, those things should develop, and you know, there should be real stuff.
Right.
For me, it's very clear. It's obviously linking the crypto world much more to the regulated world, right, to the banks, being a part of the financial circle, the old money flowing into it, and actually slowly replacing the old-fashioned way of doing things with the crypto way. So I'm looking at it much more from an institutional perspective, enabling much wider group of people in participating, and I think the things will go through the roof. I think at the moment it's still a small game in terms of how many people are accessing it. I mean, if I talk to people, everybody says, yeah, it's a bit of like the Nasdaq bubble. We are in that situation. We have to be careful. It might be going a bit up and down, but it can't be a bubble yet, because in the Nasdaq times, during the Nasdaq bubbles in 2000, 2000, I was queuing up at the cashier, and everybody was talking about what .com stock is doing what. You could talk to the cab driver about it. All these things, and everybody had something, and everybody was involved. We had now in the top when Bitcoin was 20,000, the all-time high. We had a bit of the thing that a wide audience was talking about it very actively. But then if you turn around and say, okay, how many do you have? How many do you really own? Most people say, yeah, I'm still looking, I want to enter. Then everybody said, I will enter when it comes a bit down, it's slightly high. Now it's halved or below half. And everybody says, oh, I'm really scared, let's wait. So this is a question of a new investment class. It's a new technology. It needs to build trust, and I strongly believe trust will be built when we see this link between the old world, which is rightfully or not rightfully very much trusted, being linked with this new world, and then technology will transform it totally. So I strongly believe that equities, bonds will be issued on the blockchain. How it then exactly looks like and how exactly it will be handled, time will tell. Smarter people have probably to work that out. But it's a game changer. It's a fundamental game changer, in my opinion.
Yeah, from my side, I must say, I think what is still missing at the moment is somehow we have the old world, I say traditional markets, and then we have this blockchain, blockchains, a lot of new stuff, very complicated to use. Think about Ethereum smart contracts. Even Gav Wood, who makes the language, make false mistakes in his own smart contracts. So nobody is able to work properly there. So we need a layer between. What I see probably in the future is that we will have services that focus on integration of blockchain services in combination with the old world, so using blockchain services where it's needed, but the layer between is somehow doing most of the stuff, programming and other stuff. So this is somehow missing at the moment. Also the Oracle function will be done by this layer. My vision is for the next 5 to 10 years, it's always, if you think about internet, the same happens. We will have several strong players that do different stuff. We will have probably Bitcoin, store of value. We will have probably a payment channel, what could be also Bitcoin if Lightning will succeed. We will have smart contracts at the protocol. That could be Ethereum, but it could also be Cardano or something what is not already at the stage. Right. Think about Google was a latecomer. And we will see a privacy coin. Yeah. Like a Monero, something to hide something that will always have demand worldwide. This won't go away. And so we will have several platforms that will probably growing. And a lot of people will use for the interaction with the platforms, not the platform itself. They will use layers. They don't see the back end. Like if you, I'm an 80s guy, so I'm 37 years old, and when I started with DOS, you did the code. But then Windows came up, and you saw everything, it was nice, but in fact it was the same, it was just a layer between. In fact, if you use Windows, the Windows 3.11 was just using DOS, but yeah. we will have it. The people will use blockchain, but they don't know that they use blockchain.
I used to make a lot of money installing TCP/IP on people's computers, and I'm for sure dating myself with that statement. And it was like an 8-hour job, and it didn't always work. You had to come back the next day sometimes. And now TCP/IP is like oxygen. So I think here's the question: is how many years? My last question. We'll do a quick answer, and then we're out. How many years until a cryptocurrency is part of the basket of reserve currencies of the world? Start there and go this way.
5.
3.
1. I mean, some central bank somewhere, maybe this year. Widespread in major central banks and so forth, I don't know, maybe within 10 or not. But, if it's going to happen, yeah.
So I actually think it will, some central bank somewhere this year. Yeah. My view is actually that the majority of commerce, which may or may not include the Western countries, 3 years. Because those are the places where blockchain and smart contracts are fundamentally transformative. Thanks very much, everyone, and I appreciate the attention.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.